The woman appeared at the edge of the pine forest like something out of a dream, her dark blonde hair catching the afternoon sun as she stepped past the tree line without so much as a glance at the danger signs nailed to the trunks. Xander Easton watched from his position near the rocky outcropping, his hands stilling on the deer hide he had been working, every muscle in his broad frame tensing as he realized what he was seeing. She wore a simple cotton dress the color of sage, her boots sturdy but worn, and she carried nothing but a small leather satchel across her shoulder. No rifle, no pistol, not even a walking stick. And she was heading straight into bear country. It was the summer of 1876, and the wilderness surrounding Yankton, South Dakota had been particularly active with grizzlies this season. 3 men had been mauled in the past 2 months, one of them fatally. Xander had seen the tracks himself, massive paw prints that told him at least 2 full-grown bears were ranging through this territory. Anyone with any sense stayed armed and alert. This woman moved like she was taking a Sunday stroll through a city park. He rose to his full height, his 6'4" frame unfolding from where he had been crouched. His shoulder-length dark hair was tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his solitary life in the mountains. The muscles in his arms and chest strained against his worn buckskin shirt as he gathered his rifle and started down the slope. He did not call out to her. Sound carried strange in these woods, and the last thing he needed was to startle a bear that might be bedded down nearby. She moved with a fluid grace that spoke of someone comfortable in her own skin, unbothered by the wilderness pressing in around her. Xander quickened his pace, his moccasins silent on the forest floor as he tracked her progress through the trees. She was not wandering aimlessly, he realized. She had purpose in her stride, heading deeper into the forest with clear intention. The first sign of trouble came 15 minutes later. A low grunt echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Xander's blood ran cold. He could see the woman ahead, still walking, apparently oblivious to the danger. He moved faster, closing the distance between them while keeping his eyes on the dense thicket to the left. The grizzly emerged from the shadows like a force of nature, its massive head swinging toward the woman. It was a female, Xander noted, which made her even more dangerous. She rose up on her hind legs, easily 8 feet tall, her nose testing the air. The woman stopped walking. Xander raised his rifle on the trigger, every nerve in his body screaming. But the woman did not run. She did not scream. She simply stood there, her body relaxed, her hands at her sides. And then she did something that made Xander question his own eyes. She spoke to the bear. Her voice was low and steady, carrying words he could not quite make out from his position. The bear dropped to all fours, huffing and swaying her head. The woman took a single step forward. Xander's heart hammered against his ribs. This was madness. But the bear did not charge. Instead, after a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the grizzly turned and lumbered back into the forest. The woman resumed walking as if nothing had happened. Xander stood frozen for several seconds, trying to process what he had just witnessed. Then he shook himself and continued following her. Whoever this woman was, she was either the bravest person he had ever encountered or the most foolish. Possibly both. She walked for another hour, moving deeper into territory that Xander knew well. He had lived in these mountains for 5 years ever since the war had ended, and he had decided civilian life held no appeal. Out here, a man could breathe. Out here, the only rules were the ones nature set. He had built his cabin in a hidden valley, lived off the land, and saw another human being maybe once a month when he went into Yankton for supplies. The woman finally stopped in a small clearing where a stream cut through the forest. She knelt by the water, filling a tin cup from her satchel, and drank deeply. Xander decided it was time to make his presence known before she ventured any further into truly dangerous territory. He stepped out from behind a massive pine, deliberately making noise so he would not startle her. She looked up, water dripping from her lips, and regarded him with eyes the color of storm clouds. She did not look frightened. She looked curious. "You are following me," she said. It was not a question. "You are walking through bear country without a weapon," Xander replied, his voice rough from disuse. Seemed like someone ought to keep an eye out. She stood, brushing off her dress. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had initially thought, probably in her early 20s. There was a strength in her features, a determination in the set of her jaw. "I do not need a weapon. I saw what happened back there with the grizzly," Xander said. "That was either the luckiest thing I have ever witnessed or you have got some kind of gift." "Not luck," she said simply. She held out her hand. Sarah Griffith. He took her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. Xander Easton. Most folks just call me Easton, or the Mountain Man, depending on how charitable they are feeling. A smile ghosted across her lips. Well, Easton, I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you I am perfectly safe. No offense, Miss Griffith, but that bear could have torn you apart. She could have, Sarah agreed, but she did not want to. I could tell. Animals are not the mindless killers people make them out to be. They have their own logic, their own way of seeing the world. You just have to know how to listen. Xander stared at her, trying to decide if she was insane or brilliant. Where are you heading? North. There is a valley about 3 miles from here where a particular herb grows. I need it for medicine. That is right in the middle of prime grizzly territory. There is a den up there, probably with cubs this time of year. I know, Sarah said calmly. I will be careful. Careful, Xander repeated. Lady, careful does not mean a thing to a mother bear protecting her young. Sarah tilted her head, studying him with those penetrating gray eyes. You live up here, do not you? I have heard stories in town about the mountain man who never comes down except for supplies. They say you can track anything, that you know these woods better than anyone. Stories tend to get exaggerated, Xander said, though he did not deny it. Then you know animals are not evil. They are just trying to survive, same as us. She paused. But if it would make you feel better, you are welcome to accompany me. I would not mind the company. Xander had not planned on spending his afternoon escorting a stubborn woman through the wilderness, but he found himself nodding. I will come. But if we run into trouble, you do what I say, understand? If we run into trouble, Sarah said with a slight smile, I suspect we will both do what needs to be done. They set off together, falling into an easy rhythm despite being strangers. Xander kept his rifle ready, his eyes constantly scanning the forest, while Sarah moved with that same unhurried confidence. She pointed out plants as they walked, explaining their medicinal properties with the ease of someone who had spent years studying such things. You are a healer, Xander observed. I try to be. My grandmother taught me everything she knew before she passed. She was Lakota, married my grandfather when she was young. He was a trader. Their marriage was not popular with either family, but they did not care. They loved each other. Sarah ducked under a low-hanging branch. She taught me that everything in nature has a purpose, a medicine. You just have to know where to look. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. I wish I had more time with her. Sarah's voice carried a note of sadness. She died 2 years ago, pneumonia. Ironic, really, given how much she knew about healing. Some things even the best medicine cannot fix, Xander said quietly. They walked in silence for a while, the forest alive with birdsong and the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. Xander found himself stealing glances at Sarah, fascinated by her composure. She did not flinch at shadows or jump at sounds. She moved through the wilderness like she belonged there. What about you? Sarah asked eventually. What brings a man to live alone in the mountains? Long story. We have time. Xander considered deflecting, as he usually did when anyone got curious about his past, but something about Sarah made him want to talk. I fought in the war, came home to find everything I knew had changed. People I thought I understood had become strangers, so I left. Came out here where things make sense, do they? Make sense, I mean, more than they did back in civilization, Xander said. Out here everything is honest. A bear is a bear. A mountain is a mountain. No pretense, no politics, no lies. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I understand that. Sometimes I think people complicate things that should be simple. Exactly. The valley Sarah sought appeared gradually, the forest opening up into a bowl-shaped depression filled with wildflowers and tall grass. A small creek bubbled through the center, and the air smelled sweet with pollen and earth. It was a beautiful spot, untouched and wild. It was also, Xander noted with concern, marked with fresh bear scat. Recent, he said, kneeling to examine the droppings, within the last few hours. Sarah crouched beside him, unfazed. A male from the size. How can you tell it is a male? The scat has a particular composition. Males eat more meat, females more vegetation when they are nursing. She stood, scanning the valley. The plant I need grows near the water, in the shade of those rocks. They made their way carefully across the valley, Xander's every sense on high alert. Sarah moved with purpose toward a cluster of large boulders where ferns grew thick and green. She knelt and began gently harvesting a plant with small purple flowers and jagged leaves. This is golden seal, she explained, tucking the plants carefully into her satchel. It helps with infection and inflammation. A man in town has a leg wound that is not healing properly. This should help. You do this often? Risk your life for plants to help people? Sarah looked up at him, surprise in her eyes. I am not risking my life, and yes, I do this as often as needed. What good is knowledge if you do not use it to help others? Before Xander could respond, a deep growl rumbled from behind the boulders. Every muscle in his body tensed. Slowly, he raised his rifle, positioning himself between Sarah and the sound. A massive male grizzly emerged from behind the rocks, even larger than the female they had encountered earlier. His fur was dark brown, almost black, and scars crisscrossed his muzzle. This was an old bear, a fighter. Do not move, Xander whispered. But Sarah did move. She stood slowly, her hands still at her sides, and made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. The bear's ears swiveled toward her. She spoke in a low, rhythmic voice, words that sounded like Lakota. The bear huffed, his massive head swaying. Xander's finger tightened on the trigger. If that bear charged, he would have maybe 2 seconds to drop it before it reached Sarah. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Sarah took a step toward the bear. Sarah, do not, Xander said, his voice strained. She ignored him, taking another step. The bear dropped his head, sniffing the air. Sarah continued making those soft sounds, her body language completely relaxed. The bear's aggression seemed to drain away. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and ambled off into the forest, disappearing into the trees. Sarah turned to Xander with a slight smile. See? Perfectly safe. Xander lowered his rifle, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Lady, you have got nerves of steel and the good sense of a rock. My grandmother used to say the same thing. Sarah finished gathering her plants and stood. But it has always worked out. Always works out until it does not, Xander said, more sharply than he intended. You realize that bear could have killed us both, but he did not want to. I could see it in his body language, hear it in his breathing. He was just protecting his territory. Once he understood we were not a threat, he left. Sarah met Xander's eyes. I know this seems reckless to you, but I have been doing this since I was a child. I understand these animals. Understanding something does not make it safe. No, Sarah agreed. But fear does not make it safer either. They made their way back through the valley in tense silence. Xander was frustrated, though he could not quite articulate why. Part of it was concern for this woman who seemed determined to put herself in danger. But another part, a part he was less comfortable acknowledging, was admiration. Sarah Griffith had faced down 2 grizzlies without flinching. She moved through the world with a fearlessness he had rarely seen, even in hardened soldiers. The sun was beginning to set by the time they emerged from the forest near Yankton. The town sprawled along the Missouri River, a collection of wooden buildings and dirt streets that represented the edge of civilization. Xander usually avoided coming in this late, preferring to conduct his business and leave before too many people were about. But he found himself reluctant to let Sarah walk into town alone. I can make it from here, Sarah said, sensing his hesitation. Thank you for accompanying me today. Despite your concerns, I appreciated having someone to talk to. Where do you live? Xander asked. I have a small cabin on the eastern edge of town. I see patients there, do my healing work. She adjusted her satchel. You are welcome to visit sometime if you want. Though I suspect you prefer your solitude, usually, Xander admitted. But today was not so bad. Sarah's smile was genuine and warm. Then maybe I will see you again, Easton. She walked toward town, her figure growing smaller in the fading light. Xander stood watching until she disappeared around a building, then turned toward the mountains. But as he walked, he found his thoughts returning to gray eyes and dark blonde hair and a fearlessness that both terrified and captivated him. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Xander tried to focus on his usual routine, trapping and hunting and tanning hides, but his mind kept drifting. He found himself wondering if Sarah had encountered any more bears, if her medicine had helped the man with the leg wound, if she was being careful. Finally, he admitted to himself what he had been trying to ignore. He wanted to see her again. He made the trip into Yankton on a warm July morning, carrying a bundle of furs to trade. The general store was run by a taciturn man named Miller, who asked few questions and paid fair prices, which was why Xander preferred dealing with him. After concluding their business, Xander lingered, pretending to examine some goods while working up the nerve to ask about Sarah. You looking for something in particular, Easton? Miller asked, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. I heard there is a healer on the east side of town, Xander said, aiming for casual. Thought I might check on some supplies. Miss Griffith, you mean, fine woman. Does good work. Cabin is the blue one with the herb garden out front. Cannot miss it. Xander nodded his thanks and left before Miller could ask any more questions. He found the cabin easily. It was small but well-maintained, with a neat garden full of plants Xander recognized from the forest. Chickens scratched in a small coop and a pair of goats bleated from a pen. He knocked on the door, suddenly feeling foolish. Sarah opened the door, surprise lighting her features. "Easton. This is unexpected. I was in town," Xander said. "Thought I would check that you made it back safe from your expedition." 2 weeks ago? Sarah's tone was amused. "I think if something had happened, you would have heard by now." "Right, of course." Xander shifted his weight, uncharacteristically awkward. "I also wanted to make sure you had not done anything else reckless." "Oh, I have. Several times, in fact." Sarah stepped back, opening the door wider. "Would you like to come in? I just made coffee." The cabin's interior was cozy and organized. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of dried herbs and tinctures. A small table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Medical instruments lay neatly arranged on a side table, and books were stacked everywhere, their spines worn with use. Sarah poured coffee into 2 tin cups and gestured for Xander to sit. "So tell me the truth. Did you really come to check on me, or did you just want an excuse to visit?" Xander took the coffee, grateful for something to do with his hands. "Maybe both. I will take that as a compliment." Sarah sat across from him, cradling her own cup. "The man with the leg wound is healing nicely, by the way. The golden seal did exactly what I hoped. I am glad to hear it. I have been back to the valley twice since then. No trouble with bears either time, though I did see a wolf pack. Beautiful creatures. They kept their distance." "You are going to give me gray hair," Xander muttered. Sarah laughed, a sound like water over stones. "You are not responsible for my safety, you know. I was managing just fine before I met you. That does not mean I have to like it." "No, I suppose not." Sarah studied him over the rim of her cup. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. Why do you really live alone in the mountains?" I got the sense there is more to the story than just the war. Xander was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share, but there was something about Sarah that invited honesty. "I was engaged before the war. Woman named Elizabeth. We were supposed to get married when I came back, but by the time I did come back, 3 years had passed. She had married someone else, a man who stayed home and made a fortune supplying the army. I do not blame her. War changes people. I was not the same man she had agreed to marry. That must have hurt. It did. But more than that, it made me realize I did not fit anymore. All the things people cared about, the social niceties and business deals and keeping up appearances, none of it meant anything to me anymore. So I left. Found a place where I could make sense of the world again. And have you? Made sense of it? Mostly. It is simpler out there, clearer." Xander met her eyes. "Though I am finding town has its appeal lately." Sarah's cheeks colored slightly, but she did not look away. "I am glad you came by, Easton. I have been thinking about you, wondering how you were doing up in those mountains all alone. I do fine on my own. I am sure you do, but everyone needs connection sometimes. We are not meant to be completely solitary creatures," says the woman who walks through bare country alone. "That is different. I am alone in the moment, but I come back to town. I have patients who rely on me, friends who check in. You have been hiding for 5 years. I am not hiding, are not you?" Sarah's tone was gentle, not accusatory. "It seems to me you are out there convincing yourself you do not need anyone, but I think maybe you do. I think maybe that is why you followed me that day." Xander wanted to argue, but the words would not come. She was right, at least partly. He had followed her not just out of concern for her safety, but because she had fascinated him. She still did. "What if I said I would like to see you again?" Xander asked, surprising himself with his directness. "I would say I would like that too," Sarah replied, a smile playing at her lips. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Xander found himself relaxing in a way he had not in years, laughing at Sarah's stories about stubborn patience and sharing his own tales of encounters with wildlife. When he finally rose to leave, the sun was high overhead. "Come back whenever you like," Sarah said, walking him to the door. "You do not need an excuse." "I will," Xander promised. He did come back 3 days later, and then again 4 days after that. Each visit stretched longer than the last as they discovered shared interests and values. Sarah told him about her grandmother's teachings, about growing up caught between two worlds and finding her place in the margins. Xander shared his experiences in the war, things he had never told anyone else, and found that Sarah listened without judgment. On his 4th visit, Sarah asked if she could see his cabin. I am curious about how you live up there, she explained, and I confess I would like to see more of the wilderness with someone who knows it as well as you do. Xander agreed, though he felt oddly nervous about showing her his home. They set out early the next morning, taking a trail that wound up into the mountains. The summer air was warm and sweet, birds calling from the trees as they walked. Sarah matched his pace easily, her eyes constantly noting plants and animals. You were a soldier, Sarah said at one point. What was that like? Loud, confusing, terrifying, Xander said, and boring a lot of the time. People think war is all battles and glory, but mostly it is waiting and marching and trying to stay alive another day. Did you ever think you would not make it home? Every day, especially toward the end. We lost a lot of good men. Xander's jaw tightened. My best friend died in my arms at Shiloh. Took a bullet to the chest. There was nothing I could do but hold him while he bled out. He made me promise to tell his wife he loved her. When I finally got back and found her, she had already remarried. Had not even waited a year. That is awful, Sarah said softly. It is what it is. People do what they need to do to survive. That does not make it less painful. They walked in companionable silence after that, climbing higher into the mountains. Xander's cabin appeared in a small clearing built against a rocky outcropping that provided shelter from the wind. It was sturdy and weatherproof, with a stone chimney and oiled hide windows. A vegetable garden grew beside it, and Xander's tools and traps were neatly organized under an overhang. It is lovely, Sarah said, genuine appreciation in her voice. Peaceful. It suits me. Xander opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The cabin's interior was Spartan but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with Xander's bedroll and furs arranged nearby. A rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves held his supplies and a few books. Animal hides hung from the rafters, curing in the dry air. Sarah walked around slowly, taking everything in. She paused at his small collection of books. You read? When I can get new ones. Miller orders them for me sometimes from back east. What do you like? Poetry, mostly, and history. Something about reading other people's words makes the solitude less heavy. Sarah pulled out a worn volume of Whitman and flipped through it. My grandmother used to say that words were medicine too, that a good story could heal the spirit the way herbs heal the body. Your grandmother was a wise woman, Xander said again. They spent the afternoon exploring the area around the cabin. Xander showed Sarah his trapping routes and the creek where he fished. They climbed to a high point that offered a view of the valley below, Yankton just visible in the distance. Sarah was entranced by everything, asking questions and examining plants with her practiced eye. Do you ever get lonely up here? She asked as they sat on a flat rock, sharing jerky and water. Sometimes, Xander admitted, but loneliness is better than feeling like a stranger in your own life. That is a sad way to think about it. Maybe, but it is true. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took his hand. The gesture was simple, but it sent a shock through Xander's system. Her hand was warm and calloused from work, fitting perfectly in his larger one. You do not have to be alone, you know, Sarah said. I understand wanting peace and space, but isolation is not the same as independence. Xander looked at their joined hands, then up at Sarah's face. There was something in her eyes, a warmth and openness that made his chest tight. What are you saying? I am saying I like you, Easton. I like talking to you. I like being around you. And I think maybe you like me too. I do, Xander said, his voice rough. More than I expected to, more than I thought I could still feel, Sarah smiled. And it transformed her whole face. Then maybe we should stop pretending this is just friendship. Xander had not kissed anyone in over 5 years. He had convinced himself he did not want to, that he was done with romance and all its complications. But sitting on that rock with Sarah's hand in his, he realized how wrong he had been. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. Their lips met gently at first, tentative, then with growing confidence. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was flushed and smiling. I have been wanting you to do that for weeks. I am not good at this, Xander warned. I have been alone a long time. I am set in my ways. I am not asking you to change who you are. I am just asking you to let me in. Sarah squeezed his hand. We can figure out the rest as we go. They made their way back to the cabin as the sun began to set. Xander built up the fires while Sarah examined his herb stores, suggesting additions that might be useful. They made dinner together, moving around the small space with an ease that surprised them both. When it was time for Sarah to head back to town, Xander offered to walk her down. I will be fine, Sarah said. It is a clear night and I know the trail now. I know you will be fine, but I want to walk with you anyway. They made their way down the mountain in the gathering darkness, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. At the edge of town, they paused. "When can I see you again?" Xander asked. "Whenever you want. Though I have patients tomorrow, so probably the day after. I will come by in the afternoon." Sarah stood on her toes and kissed him again, quick and sweet. "I am glad you followed me that day in the forest." "So am I," Xander admitted. He watched her walk into town, waiting until she was safely inside her cabin before turning back toward the mountains. But this time the solitude felt different. Not peaceful, but lonely. He found himself already counting the hours until he could see Sarah again. The summer passed in a blur of visits and long conversations. Xander found himself spending more time in Yankton, helping Sarah with repairs around her cabin and accompanying her on her expeditions into the wilderness. She never lost her fearlessness around animals, though she grudgingly agreed to carry a pistol when Xander insisted. They encountered more bears, wolves, and once a mountain lion, but Sarah's calm presence seemed to diffuse every potential confrontation. Xander also began meeting Sarah's patients, the people who relied on her healing skills. There was old Mrs. Patterson with her rheumatism, who Sarah treated with willow bark tea. Young Timothy Marsh, who had broken his arm falling from a tree, and who Sarah set with practiced efficiency. The Johnson's baby with a fever that broke after Sarah's careful ministrations. Watching Sarah work, Xander saw the full extent of her dedication to helping others. "You are good at this," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the stars emerge. "It is what I am meant to do," Sarah said simply. "My grandmother knew it before I did. She said I had the gift that I could feel what people needed before they even told me. Do you ever wish you had done something else? Gone somewhere else?" "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have formal medical training, but then I remember that no school would teach me what my grandmother did, about plants and spirits and the old ways. And besides, these people need me. Where would they go if I left?" Xander knew she was right. The nearest doctor was in Sioux Falls, over 50 miles away. Sarah was all the medicine Yankton had, and she took that responsibility seriously. As summer faded into fall, their relationship deepened. Xander found himself opening up in ways he had not thought possible, sharing his fears and hopes with Sarah. She, in turn, revealed her own vulnerabilities. She told him about the loneliness of being different, of straddling two cultures and never quite belonging to either. About the prejudice she sometimes faced from people who did not trust her methods or her mixed heritage. "They whisper about me," Sarah admitted one day. "Call me a witch or a savage, but they still come when they need help, when their children are sick or their wives are in difficult labor. Their ignorance is not your problem," Xander said fiercely. "No, but their pain is. I cannot turn people away just because they are unkind. That is not who I want to be." It was that compassion, that unwavering dedication to doing right even when it was hard, that made Xander fall completely in love with her. He realized it one October morning as he watched her carefully bandaging a child's scraped knee, her movements gentle and sure. He loved her, completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly. The question was what to do about it. They were in his cabin when he finally worked up the courage to say something. A early snowstorm had caught them by surprise during one of their expeditions, forcing them to return to his place until it passed. Sarah stood by the fire, warming her hands, her hair damp from melted snow. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Xander said, his voice tight with nervousness. She turned, concern in her eyes. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least, I hope it is not." He crossed the room to stand in front of her. "I love you. I have loved you for a while now, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid you would not feel the same, or that I would mess this up somehow." Sarah's face softened, and she reached up to cup his bearded cheek. "You big fool, I love you too. I have been waiting for you to say something. You could have said it first. I could have, but I wanted you to be ready. I know this is hard for you, letting someone in again." She smiled. "But I am glad you did." Xander pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She fit perfectly against him, her head tucked under his chin. They stood like that for a long moment, the fire crackling beside them and the snow falling outside. "What do we do now?" Xander asked eventually. "We keep doing what we have been doing. We figure it out together." Sarah pulled back to look up at him. "Unless you are about to ask me to marry you, in which case the answer is yes." Xander laughed, surprised. "I was not, but now that you mention it, that is not a bad idea." "I am being serious," Sarah said. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more sure of anything. I love you, Easton. I love your strength and your kindness and your terrible jokes." I love how you look at the world and how you make me feel safe while still letting me be who I am. So yes, I will marry you. I am asking, Xander said, his voice thick with emotion. I do not have a ring or a fancy speech, but I am asking, will you marry me, Sarah Griffith? Yes, Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Yankton. Xander wore his cleanest buckskins, and Sarah wore a dress of cream-colored linen that her grandmother had made years ago. The preacher seemed surprised that anyone was willing to marry the strange mountain man and the healer with Indian blood, but he performed the ceremony without comment. Miller from the general store served as witness, along with Mrs. Patterson and several of Sarah's patients. After the ceremony, they returned to Sarah's cabin for a small celebration. Sarah's friends had brought food and drink, and the little house was filled with laughter and music. Xander felt overwhelmed by it all, unused to being the center of attention, but Sarah stayed close to his side, her hand in his. "How are you doing?" she asked at one point, pulling him aside. "I am good, better than good. I am happy." Xander shook his head in wonder. "I did not think I could feel this way again." "Get used to it," Sarah said, kissing him. "I plan on making you happy for a very long time." They spent their wedding night in Sarah's cabin, and Xander discovered that being with someone you loved was completely different from anything he had experienced before. There was tenderness and passion, laughter and whispered promises. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Sarah curled against his side, Xander felt a peace he had not known since before the war. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked sleepily. "That I am the luckiest man alive." Good answer. They decided to keep both the cabin in the mountains and the house in Yankton. Sarah needed to be accessible to her patients, but she also loved the wilderness and the peace of Xander's mountain home. They split their time between the two places, developing a rhythm that worked for them both. Winter came hard that year, with heavy snows and bitter cold. Xander taught Sarah how to read animal tracks in the snow and how to move silently through the winter woods. She, in turn, shared more of her grandmother's teachings, including the old stories and songs that had been passed down through generations. One particularly cold January night, they were huddled by the fire in the mountain cabin when Sarah said, "Tell me about your family, your parents, your siblings. You never talk about them." Xander stared into the flames. "Not much to tell. My father was a farmer, broke his back trying to make a living from hard soil. He died when I was 15. My mother followed him a year later, said she could not live without him. I had a sister, younger than me. She married and moved to St. Louis. We write sometimes, but we are not close. Do they know about me? I wrote to my sister last week, told her I had gotten married. I doubt she will write back. She always thought I was crazy for living up here. Maybe she will surprise you." Sarah was right. A letter arrived in late February, forwarded from Yankton to the mountain cabin by Miller. Xander's sister Margaret wrote that she was happy he had found someone and invited them to visit St. Louis. She also, somewhat awkwardly, apologized for not being a better sister and said she hoped they could reconnect. "See," Sarah said, reading over his shoulder. "People can change, I suppose." Xander folded the letter carefully. "Would you want to go? To St. Louis, I mean? Someday, maybe. But not yet. I have patients here who need me, and I like our life the way it is." Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and budding trees. Sarah discovered she was pregnant in April, and Xander's joy was tempered by a fierce protectiveness. He worried constantly about her continuing to make expeditions into the wilderness, about her lifting heavy supplies, about 1,000 other things that Sarah found both touching and exasperating. "I am not made of glass," she told him for the 100th time. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I know what I am doing. That does not mean I have to like it." "You do not have to like it. You just have to trust me." Trust did not come easily to Xander, but he worked at it. He accompanied Sarah on her rounds, carrying her supplies and hovering like an anxious bear. Sarah tolerated his concern with good humor, though she drew the line when he tried to prevent her from making a trip into the forest for herbs. "I am going," she said firmly. "I need these plants for Mrs. Henderson's breathing problems. You can come with me if you want, but you are not stopping me." They went together, as they did most things. Xander carried her bag and watched for danger while Sarah moved through the forest with her usual confidence. Her belly was just beginning to show, a small curve under her dress. She looked radiant, her skin glowing with health and happiness. They encountered a grizzly on the way back, a young male who seemed more curious than aggressive. Sarah spoke to him in that soft voice, and the bear ambled away after a few minutes. Xander shook his head, still amazed by her gift even after a year of witnessing it. "Our child is going to think this is normal," he said, "walking up to bears and expecting them not to attack. Our child will be taught to respect animals, not fear them," Sarah replied. "There is a difference." Their son was born in December of 1877 during a howling blizzard that trapped them in the mountain cabin for 3 days. Xander delivered the baby himself with Sarah's guidance, his hands shaking with fear and wonder as he held the tiny, squalling infant. "A boy," Sarah said weakly, reaching for the baby. "Oh, Easton, he is perfect." Xander cleaned and wrapped his son, then placed him carefully in Sarah's arms. "What should we name him?" "What about Samuel, after my grandfather?" "Samuel Easton," Xander said, testing the name. "I like it." Little Samuel had his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. He was a healthy baby, strong and curious, and Xander fell completely in love with him. The fierce protectiveness he had felt for Sarah doubled, then tripled. He would do anything to keep his family safe. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Xander did most of the hunting and trapping, while Sarah continued her healing work, often with Samuel strapped to her chest in a cradle board she had made in the traditional Lakota way. The baby seemed as fearless as his mother, content to be carried through the wilderness and apparently unbothered by the animals they encountered. When Samuel was 6 months old, they made their first family expedition back to the valley where Xander had first followed Sarah. It was summer again, the forest green and alive. Samuel babbled happily from his cradleboard as they walked. "Do you remember that day?" Sarah asked. "When you followed me, convinced I was going to get myself killed." "I still think you were reckless," Xander said, but he was smiling. "Maybe, but if I had not been, we might never have met." "True. I have been thinking about that a lot lately. About how much my life has changed because of one decision to follow a strange woman into the woods." "Strange woman?" Sarah laughed. "I prefer fearless woman, thank you." They reached the valley and found it unchanged, a green bowl of peace and wildflowers. Samuel reached for the flowers with his chubby hands, gurgling with delight. Xander stood with his arm around Sarah, their son between them, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "I love you," he said, "both of you, more than I knew it was possible to love anything." "I love you too," Sarah said, leaning into him. "Thank you for following me that day. Thank you for not giving up on me or on yourself." They stayed in the valley for an hour, letting Samuel explore the grass while they gathered herbs. On the way back, they saw a grizzly in the distance, the same female Sarah had encountered 2 years ago. The bear had cubs now, 2 yearlings that tumbled and played while their mother watched. Sarah paused, observing them with a smile. "Life goes on," she said softly. "Everything finds its place eventually." The years passed with a gentle rhythm. Samuel grew into a bright, adventurous boy who loved the wilderness as much as his parents did. Xander taught him to track and hunt, while Sarah passed on her grandmother's teachings about plants and animals. The boy learned to move through the forest with respect and awareness, understanding that he was part of nature, not separate from it. Sarah and Xander had 2 more children, a daughter named Charlotte, born in 1879, and another son, Henry, born in 1881. Their cabin in the mountains was expanded to accommodate the growing family, while the house in Yankton served as Sarah's medical practice and their winter home. Xander never did completely overcome his tendency to worry about his family, but he learned to channel it into productive action rather than controlling behavior. He built a stronger fence around the cabin, added a root cellar for storing supplies, and made sure they always had enough food and firewood. Sarah tolerated his preparations with affection, recognizing them for what they were, a soldier's way of protecting the people he loved. As the children grew, they became known throughout Yankton as the Healer's family, the strange but kind people who lived in the mountains and never seemed to fear anything. Samuel, at age 10, once walked a lost child out of the forest after dark, navigating by starlight. Charlotte had her mother's gift with plants and was already helping prepare medicines by the time she was 8. Henry showed signs of his father's tracking skills, able to read signs in the forest that most adults would miss. One evening in the summer of 1887, when Samuel was 9 and Charlotte 6 and Henry 4, the family sat on the porch of their mountain cabin watching the sunset. The children played nearby while Sarah and Xander sat close together, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Letting me drag you out of your comfortable solitude?" "Never," Xander said without hesitation. You gave me my life back, Sarah. I was just existing before you. Now I am living. We gave each other something, Sarah said. You showed me that I did not have to face everything alone, that letting someone help does not make me weak. You were never weak. You walked into bear country without a rifle and without fear. That is the definition of strength. Or stupidity, Sarah laughed. I am still not sure which. Both, Xander said. Definitely both. Samuel called out that he had spotted a deer at the edge of the clearing, and the moment of quiet reflection was broken by the excited chatter of children. But later that night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Sarah and Xander lay in their bed and talked about their life together. I want you to know, Sarah said, her head on his chest, that you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. I used to think I would always be alone, that my work would be enough. But this, our family, our life together, this is everything. I know what you mean, Xander said, stroking her hair. I thought I was done with happiness after the war. I thought I had used up my share, but you proved me wrong. Good. You needed to be wrong about something. They laughed together in the darkness, the easy laughter of people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway. As the years continued to pass, Xander and Sarah became respected elders in the Yankton community. Sarah's healing practice grew, and she began training younger people who showed an interest in medicine. She taught them not just about herbs and treatments, but about the importance of respecting patients and seeing them as whole people, not just collections of symptoms. Xander occasionally took on hunting parties, guiding wealthy men from back east who wanted to experience the wilderness. He was known as tough but fair, a man who could track anything and who knew the mountains better than anyone. But he always made sure to be home for important moments with his family, never letting his work take precedence over the people he loved. Samuel grew into a young man who combined his father's strength with his mother's compassion. He decided to become a tracker and guide like his father, but with a focus on helping people rather than just hunting game. Charlotte developed into a gifted healer, learning everything Sarah could teach her and adding her own innovations. Henry showed an artistic temperament, spending hours drawing the animals and landscapes around him with surprising skill. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1892, Xander took Sarah back to the valley where they had first met. The children were old enough to stay home alone for a day, so it was just the two of them, walking the familiar trail through the forest. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? Xander asked. When I told you that you were walking through bear country without a rifle. I'd said I did not need a weapon, Sarah replied, and I was right. You were lucky. I was skilled. There is a difference. Sarah grinned at him. Are we really going to have this argument again after 15 years? Probably. I like arguing with you. They reached the valley and found it as beautiful as ever. They sat on the same rock where Xander had first kissed Sarah, looking out over the wildflowers and listening to the creek babble nearby. I have been thinking about the future, Sarah said, about what happens when we are older. I want to make sure Charlotte knows everything I know, that she can take care of people after I am gone. That is a long time away, Xander said, though the thought of losing Sarah made his chest tight. I know, but I want to be prepared. I want to know that the work will continue. Sarah took his hand, and I want to make sure you will be okay. You have gotten better about being around people, but I worry sometimes. I will be fine. I have the children. And besides, you are not going anywhere for a very long time. I plan on it. I have too much to do to die anytime soon. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a hawk circle overhead. Then Xander said, "Thank you. For what?" "For walking into bear country without a rifle and without fear. For being so stubborn and brave and impossible that I had to follow you. For giving me a reason to come down from the mountain." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for following. Thank you for being patient with me, and for loving me even when I am difficult. Especially when you are difficult." They stayed in the valley until the sun began to set, then made their way home through the gathering twilight. Their cabin glowed with lamplight in the distance, and they could hear their children's voices carrying on the evening air. It was everything Xander had never known he wanted, everything he had thought he could never have again. The children grew and eventually left to make their own ways in the world. Samuel married and started a guiding business in Deadwood. Charlotte took over Sarah's medical practice in Yankton, eventually marrying a schoolteacher and having 3 children of her own. Henry went east to study art in Chicago, sending home regular letters and sketches. Xander and Sarah returned full-time to their mountain cabin, finally having the space and solitude they had missed during the busy years of raising children. But it was a different kind of solitude now, shared and comfortable, filled with companionship and love. They were in their late 50s when Sarah began having trouble with her breathing. She knew what it was, had seen it in patients before. Her lungs were failing slowly but inevitably. She told Xander one winter evening, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "There is nothing that can be done," she said. "I have tried every treatment I know. This is just how it is." Xander felt his world tilt. "No, there has to be something. We can go to a doctor in Sioux Falls or even St. Louis. We can find help." "Easton, listen to me. I am a healer. I know my own body. This is not something that can be fixed." Sarah took his hands in hers. "I am not afraid. I have had a good life, a wonderful life. I have loved and been loved. I have children and grandchildren. I have done work that mattered. I am at peace with this." "I am not," Xander said, his voice breaking. "I cannot lose you. You are not losing me." "Not really. I will always be with you in your memories, in our children. Love does not end just because a body does." They spent Sarah's remaining months traveling to all their favorite places. They visited the valley where they had met. They walked the forest trails, Sarah moving more slowly but still with that same fearless grace. They spent time with each of their children, making sure Sarah could say everything she needed to say. On a clear spring morning in 1898, Sarah died in their mountain cabin, with Xander holding her hand. Her last words were, "Thank you for the adventure." Xander buried her in the valley, in the spot where they had first encountered the grizzly together. He carved a simple marker from pine, her name and the words, "She walked without fear." The grief was crushing, a weight that threatened to drag him under. But Xander had learned something during his years with Sarah. He had learned that isolation was not the answer to pain, so he reached out to his children, let them comfort him and share their own grief. He continued to live in the cabin, but he came down to Yankton regularly to visit Charlotte and his grandchildren. He lived another 12 years, dying peacefully in his sleep in 1910 at the age of 70. His children buried him next to Sarah in the valley, his marker reading, "He followed to keep up." Samuel took over his father's cabin and continued his work as a guide and tracker. Charlotte expanded her mother's medical practice, training 2 of her own daughters in the healing arts. Henry's drawings of the wilderness and its animals became well known, exhibited in galleries across the country. But more than their professional accomplishments, Xander and Sarah's children carried forward their parents' legacy of courage, compassion, and respect for the natural world. They taught their own children the same lessons, and those children taught theirs, creating a line of people who walk through the world with fearlessness, tempered by wisdom. The valley where Xander and Sarah were buried became a family gathering place. Somewhere their descendants came to remember and connect with the wilderness their ancestors had loved. The grizzlies still ranged through the area, and family legend said they never bothered anyone who visited the graves, as if Sarah's gift had left a lasting protection over the place. Years later, when Samuel was an old man himself, he brought his own grandchildren to the valley. He told them the story of how their great-grandmother had walked into bear country without a rifle and without fear, and how their great-grandfather had followed just to keep up. How from that meeting had come a love that shaped a family and taught them all what it meant to be brave. Was she really not afraid? One grandchild asked, even when the bears came. Maybe she was, Samuel said, remembering his mother's wisdom. But she did not let fear stop her from doing what needed to be done. That is what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but walking forward despite it. The grandchildren scattered to explore the valley, and Samuel sat on the rock where his parents had often sat, feeling their presence in the wind and the trees. He thought about legacy, about the way love and courage echo through generations, teaching lessons that never grow old. His mother had been right, Samuel realized. Love did not end when bodies did. It lived on in stories and memories, in the values passed down, and the lives shaped by those who came before. Xander and Sarah's love story had not ended with their deaths. It continued in every fearless step their descendants took, in every act of compassion, in every moment of standing firm against the things that threatened to make them smaller than they were meant to be. The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Samuel made his way back to where his grandchildren waited, gathering them up for the walk home. As they left, he took one last look back at the simple markers in the meadow. Thank you, he thought, for showing us how to live, for teaching us that love is worth the risk, that courage is worth the effort, that the wildness in our hearts is something to be honored, not tamed. The forest closed in behind them as they walked, the valley returning to its peaceful solitude, but it was never truly empty. Two spirits remained there, forever young, forever in love, forever walking through bare country without fear, together as they had been in life. And in the hearts of everyone who knew their story, they lived on, a reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with a single fearless step into the unknown, and that sometimes the best thing we can do is follow someone brave enough to show us the way.